Okay, so I think that we're just about ready to get going. So before I hand it off to DG and Tanya to give us an overview and some introductions, I'll introduce myself. My name's Sierra, and I'm going to be moderating this discussion today. So after some overview information and presentations from the panelists, we'll move into a moderated FAQ, and following that, we'll have time for you as viewers to ask any questions you might have to the panelists. During the question period at the end, feel free to use the question and answer function, which exists down at the bottom of your screen, or the chat on the side to type in your question. And if any time you have technical difficulties, please feel free to connect with our facilitator, Anna, and we'll do our best to get it fixed. I'll now hand it off to DG and Tanya to introduce themselves and to give you an overview.
Great. Thanks very much, Sierra, and welcome everybody. Really pleased to have folks here to join us for Birds and Cats, Innovative Solutions for Finding Common Ground. So really hoping that everybody can learn a few new things and ask some interesting questions and engage in dialogue at the end of the session. So first of all, we'll just go over some of the basics. This webinar is being hosted by the Stewardship Center for British Columbia, and our mission is to strengthen ecological stewardship in BC by providing educational, technical, and capacity programs and resources to organizations, governments, the private sector, and the general public. And we always work through collaborative partnerships. Our work is in three main areas: green shores, wildlife and species at risk, and strengthening stewardship. And this webinar today is part of our wildlife and species at risk, as well as strengthening stewardship. So a little bit about our Cats and Birds project. Our goal is really to increase capacity of animal welfare and conservation organizations to work together through a collaborative process to make BC a safer place for both cats and birds. We definitely are working from this perspective of having both all these different audiences involved. And I think the number of different contributing partners that you can see there on the bottom of the screen really demonstrates that, including our academic partners. Project initiatives include working together on a Cats and Birds committee, and we'll hear more about the cat count and the land bird count later. We also host a variety of workshops and events and concentrate on outreach and education. So now a little bit about our panelists. I'll just do an introduction to them all. First up, after myself, we have Tanya Lush. Tanya works as a Partners in Flight British Columbia Program Manager with Environment and Climate Change Canada's Canadian Wildlife Service. She collaborates with partners to conserve migratory birds and bats. Her work includes finding effective approaches to reducing outdoor roaming cats and the mortality of birds and other wildlife. She's particularly interested in engagement with veterinarians as partners in keeping cats and wildlife safe. Her two rescue cats have given her a lot of perspective on the cat issue. Tanya will be followed by Harold Esther, and he is a PhD candidate at the University of British Columbia Institute for Resources, Environment and Sustainability. He's working with the Stewardship Center as our Bright intern over the course of this year, and he's coordinating bird counts across Greater Vancouver to identify how the region can better support our feathered friends. Harold brings his joy for birding, painting, and outdoor adventure into his research as much as possible, though he's yet to figure out a way of incorporating his enthusiasm for sourdough baking. Harold will be followed by Jaylene Bastos, and his current research is centered around urban wildlife behavior and animal cognition. He is conducting the Vancouver Cat Count Research Project for the Stewardship Center. He's working with an advisory committee under the supervision of Dr. Elizabeth Gao from the University of Guelph on the project that is monitoring urban cats with trail cameras and estimating the number of outdoor cats in Vancouver. And then our final panelist is Megan Kent. She's manager of companion animal welfare and science policy for the BC SPCA. Megan has worked for the SPCA for more than a decade in the areas of education, advocacy, research, and policy. Before that, she enjoyed a career as a wildlife habilitator. She's completed her master's degree at University of British Columbia, studying the rehabilitation of black bear cubs. She has a keen interest in improving animal welfare and a fondness for both cats and birds. So without further ado, I will pass along to Tanya to give an overview from the environment and climate change perspective.
Thanks, DG. Welcome, everyone. I'm Tanya Lush. So birds are intrinsically important to us, or are intrinsically important, but they're also culturally and economically important to us. In 2019, as many of you may have read, scientists with Cornell released a groundbreaking publication that revealed that some startling statistics. Since 1970, we have lost 30% of our birds. Almost 3 billion birds have been wiped out in North America in less than a span of a single human lifetime. Across the continent, numbers have plummeted, even among common species like the barn swallow and the western meadowlark. Canada's 2019 State of the Birds report breaks down the declines in our country by bird guild. Aerial insectivores, grassland birds, and shorebirds are suffering the worst declines, but there are also forest birds that are seriously declining, like the evening grosbeak. The main reason for the declines is habitat loss, but other threats are also taking their toll. Climate change, pollution, window collisions, and of course cats, to name a few. In 2013, a series of publications were released by scientists from Environment and Climate Change Canada. They each estimate the number of birds killed directly by various sources like building collisions, transportation, agriculture, and forestry. Calvert et al. From 2013 synthesizes all of the studies into one paper. And as you can see here, after habitat loss, cats are the #1 human-caused direct source of bird mortality. It is important to note that birds are experiencing the cumulative effect of a wide range of threats. So population declines for many species are likely a result of death by 1,000 cuts. Unfortunately, cats are not just depredating animals that would have died from other sources, but instead serve as an added source of mortality. When you think about tackling and reversing the effects of something like climate change, bird mortality by cats seems like, and should be, low-hanging fruit. Because it is a top threat, bird mortality by cats is a high priority for Environment and Climate Change Canada. It is a highly controversial topic with many stakeholders and a large human dimensions component. Thus, we're interested in funding innovative projects like this one that engages multiple stakeholders to find collaborative solutions. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Tanya. And while Tanya is changing slides, we'll switch it over to Harold to follow up.
Thank you so much, Tanya and DG. So now I'll talk a bit about what we're doing on this project in Vancouver to try and understand how the birds are doing here and what maybe we can do about it. So all of you are here likely because birds bring joy to our lives and you enjoy seeing the birds in and around this area. Things like baby Canada geese hatching in the spring, even if you're in a really urban environment, these birds are all around us. Or towhees welcoming in the start of spring. And birds are a key link between humans and nature, as Tanya touched on. This is especially true in cities where other forms of nature and wildlife are often quite uncommon, but birds are still able to coexist with us in these areas. However, as Tanya alluded to earlier, we've seen huge decreases in birds across Canada, with some species doing well, like waterfowl and colonial seabirds, but these terrestrial birds are declining all across the board. And again, as Tanya alluded to, over the past 40 years, we've lost about 3 billion birds. And so this is a pretty steep decline. And so what we're wondering here is, also Tanya said these kind of habitat loss is one of the main key drivers of this bird decline. So for example, here you can see an aerial image in Vancouver. This is on the edge of UBC campus in 2003. And you can see there's a golf course, and then there's a forest patch, and then an urban patch. And then if you go to 2019, that's starting to be developed. You'll see the fields that formerly existed on the left have, some of them have turned into pavement and asphalt, and the forests are being demolished for apartments. And if you go back there right now in 2020, you'll see that that forest is even smaller. And so these things like habitat loss are really affecting birds. But also, as Tanya mentioned, cats are also a big part of that. Cats kill about 2 to 7% of birds in southern Canada. And just their presence, even if they don't kill the birds, can really decrease breeding success and make it so that birds are less likely to rear successful young. And so the question that we're asking here is, can Vancouver be part of the solution? Can we, as a city, help to reverse these big declines that we're seeing in these birds? And so the two aspects of that are seeing, well, okay, how can the city improve bird habitat? And how can the city decrease bird predation by cats? And so to find out how, in June, we launched the Vancouver Urban Land Bird Count. And you can see here that this is a map of Vancouver, and I've plotted the red dots are surveys that were done by Stephanie Mellies in the late 1990s. And the purple squares and green squares are transects that were done by Weber and Lancaster in the 1960s and 1970s. And so Vancouver is really lucky to have this huge network of historical counts. And so by comparing current counts to those previous counts, we can get an idea of how birds are actually trending in Vancouver, not just across Canada, but just in our own city. And so every morning for 4 hours after sunrise, I've been going out to areas across the city. Here's a transect that I did in the West End. And I'll walk these streets and I'll record all the birds I see and where they are. And this is the same technique that was used in the 60s. And so it's directly comparable to those exactly same sort of method. And so since June, I've conducted about 560 point counts and 120 transect surveys and recorded more than 15,000 birds. And I'll be doing this for a whole year. So I started in June and I'll be doing it through May. And that'll give a whole seasonal distribution of what birds are here and what habitats they're using and how those differed from the surveys that were done in the 60s, 70s, and 90s. And so it's been quite nice. I get to get up every morning before sunrise and see the sunrise over Vancouver's neighborhoods. And sometimes I get to see some forest birds like this black-throated gray warbler or pileated woodpeckers or red-breasted nuthatches. There's been a lot of, they've had a really high breeding success this year. I don't know if you've noticed them, but there've been a lot of them after July or August when they started hatching. There's been many of them in the urban environments I've been to. Or watching northwestern crows, or now American crows, fledgling and learning how to eat cherries. It's been great to watch these birds grow up. And I haven't, because I haven't finished these surveys yet, I haven't analyzed all the data, but I've begun to see just anecdotally, looking at the old surveys and looking at my surveys, that there seems to be a lot more Oregon juncos breeding success in the city. It seems like before they were mostly here in the winter, but now we have them breeding even in very urban areas. While things like house sparrows seem to be declining. Don't seem as abundant in these same areas that they were 40 years ago. American robins also seem to be declining. They seem to be much more abundant in the counts that were done in the past. And so in addition to recording what birds I see, I'm also recording what sorts of trees or habitat those birds are in, and what sort of habitats and trees exist in each of these places that I'm surveying. So for example, here's a mountain ash on the left and a river on the right. And so the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to compare these bird counts that I'm doing now and the plants and landscapes they're in to historical data. So I might look in the 1970 data and see that there were 2 robins in this one area that had mountain ashes. And now there's only 1 robin in an area that now has river birch. And so then from that, we might be able to glean that by having more mountain ashes, we could actually increase robin populations, and that those are more, that robins enjoy that sort of habitat better than river birch. And that makes sense because robins really, I don't know if the mountain ashes are just starting to give fruit right now, and the robins really like eating their berries. So the first objective will be to try and understand what sort of habitats are good for birds in the city, and then we might be able to increase those habitats and therefore increase the bird population. And the second aspect is comparing the bird density. So for example, on the left here, this is an imaginary map. I haven't actually created this yet because I haven't collected all the data, but you can imagine that I'll be able to calculate how high bird abundance is in different parts of the city. And in concert with that, as Jalen will talk about next, he's doing a study looking at to calculate cat density. And so by comparing cat density and bird density and seeing where they overlap, for example, maybe this area in downtown Vancouver, we find that there's really high cat and really high bird density. And those are areas where we can target engagement with cat owners and try and build awareness about the ways that cats can harm birds and try and keep cats inside. And with those habitat loss ameliorations and cat awareness, we might be able to decrease the loss of birds in Vancouver and maybe even increase it. And we hope that this sort of study that combines cat and bird research can be used across Canada and perhaps lead to bird conservation across North America. Thank you. And next, I'll pass it back to DG and then on to Jalen.
Great. Thanks so much, Harold. Very, very interesting. So while Harold's getting off of there, we'll let Jay pull up his slide deck.
Hello, everyone. I'm just pulling up the slide here, but as Harold was mentioning, I am the individual who was conducting the research for the Vancouver cat count. And so that's the on-the-ground field work. Let me make sure. Perfect. Okay. For estimating the total number of cats that call Vancouver home. And so first and foremost, we wanted to use this study to set the stage for using trail cameras to estimate the number. So that's the abundance and occupancy and density of cats within Vancouver's neighborhoods. So unlike Harold's sort of methodologies in which we have that sort of robust data set to compare to, we're using cameras as a sort of new methodology, testing out whether or not we can accurately estimate the number of cats that call Vancouver home. One of the things we really also wanted to drive home with the study is sort of rooting animal welfare for both birds and cats in the study. So cats are allowed out when they're allowed outside unsupervised, as sort of Tanya alluded to. They are at higher risks of either vehicle collisions, coyote predation, and disease transfer and parasite interaction as well. And that's just because these outdoor areas that cats are allowed into unsupervised, they exist with the other animals that call Vancouver home. While outside, Vancouver's cat populations also, they hunt for pleasure. And so this contributes directly to the decline of our urban bird population. One of the most important things that we're trying to do with these trail cams is to identify individual cats, because the individual cats is going to be the data that we need in order to run the statistical models to calculate how many cats are actually outside in the city of Vancouver. So we're going to be using our trail cameras to estimate the number of free roaming cats. And hopefully this will help to inform policies for both improving the life of cats and birds within the city of Vancouver. So many of you are maybe curious about how we actually plan on doing this. So first and foremost, I just really want to highlight that this project couldn't have been done without the community engagement and the community partners that provided the sites for our camera installments. And so first and foremost, the Vancouver Parks Board was integral in allowing us to set up cameras within the park locations. We have a lot of community volunteers, so that's individual residents within Vancouver's different residential areas that allowed us to put up cameras within their home properties. And then we had a variety of business owners, NGOs, and organizations within the city of Vancouver that were also quite interested in the project and sort of jumped on board, allowing us to monitor their areas. Now, many of you may be also curious how we went about and actually divided the city to sort of monitor and where to place the cameras. And so we actually divided the city of Vancouver into these 4 major land use categories. So as you can see here, we have commercial identified in purple, we have the residential land use areas in blue, we have Vancouver's urban green spaces in green, and then we have the industrial in sort of this peachy. And our main focus was to get equal representation, or proportional representation rather, of the cameras in each one of these land use areas. And so we've placed cameras in the residential areas, in the industrial spaces, in the green spaces, as well as the commercial sites that represent their proportional makeup of Vancouver. So how we actually are going about and installing these cameras. So the cameras themselves, we're using wildlife trail cameras. They're roughly small motion censored cameras that are going to be, they were installed 30 centimeters or so, no higher than just about half a meter above the ground. And that was to ensure that we were getting the field of view that we wanted. So making sure that we were going to be able to get the height at which cats were going to be crossing in front of the camera's field of view. The cameras were going to be in operation for 24 hours a day. And every time the motion sensor was actually triggered, the camera would take 5 photographs, 1 photograph per second. The cameras that we had throughout the city of Vancouver, so that's 34, we had installed from July to September. So that was about a 12-week period, with each location being monitored for 3 weeks. So we had a total of 4 sessions. Throughout the deployment, we were able to actually get very clear images of the cats in question. And as you can see sort of through these first images here, we were able to very clearly identify individuals based off their coding, their coloring, or other identifiable markers, be it the time of day, who they're interacting with, or their collars and tags as such. One of the most alarming things that I wanted to sort of showcase here in the next slide is the different amounts of animals that are actually utilizing these same spaces within Vancouver. And the risk to cats as well as birds specifically with the interaction of sharing these spaces unsupervised. And so as you can see here, we have cats walking through the alleys in the same spaces where we have our local crow populations, as well as you can see in the corner there are some raccoons. And this is all a blended photo actually of the same alleyway, just at different times of day, in which case there's high potential for wildlife conflict or disease transfer. Lastly, I want to sort of also showcase that even within our park spaces, we have really high utilization of these spaces by our Vancouver cat population, as well as the other animals, just touching back on that risk to both cats as well as birds in these spaces. So as you can see here, a real diverse range of animals. We have raccoons, we have coyotes, we have skunks, as well as, you know, this black cat that is constantly visiting the area. And this is what is so concerning and why we wanted to go and actually estimate the total number of cats in Vancouver because of this type of interaction and the potential for cats in these spaces. So many of you might be curious what we're doing next, or sort of where are the final steps. And with the Vancouver cat count, we've actually finished the data observation period, and now we've moved on to our data processing and analysis. So that just means that we are taking through all of those photos, and we're using AI software in order to actually go through and identify the individual cats within the photographs that we've taken throughout the study. Once those cats have been uploaded, an individual will be able to run the models in order to determine the actual number of individuals that call Vancouver home. We're going to continue also developing our community partnerships and engagement, because as I said earlier in the presentation, this is first and foremost a means to sort of test these methodologies, and we want to make sure that we have the means to continue this type of research moving forward within the community. How we're going to be presenting this information as a final sort of presentation will be in a final report. And so we're actually in the just sort of middle processes now in drafting that report. And lastly, we're going to be reviewing and redesigning, sort of going over the best practices and lessons learned throughout the camera trap project. And that's because our hope for the Stewardship Center and for monitoring cats with cameras in general is to have this replicated across different municipalities across Canada. And so our hope is to, one, inform the policies and the communities and engage with the actual individuals who are allowing cats outside unsupervised. But secondly, to make sure that we can replicate the study across municipalities so that we can sort of tackle this from a wider, than just Vancouver sort of. Yeah, that's sort of where we're at with the Vancouver cat count. And I will now be passing it over back to Gigi quickly, but then over to Megan. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks very much, Jay. A fantastic overview of that project. So now we'll turn it over to Megan.
Hey everyone, just getting started, a little technical difficulties there. Can everyone hear me? Am I good, DG?
Yep, good to go.
Excellent, thanks so much, guys. So I'm here today, as Jalen already touched on, a bit of cat welfare, so I'm going to speak to that in a little more detail today, and basically look at the issue of indoor-outdoor cats from a cat's perspective. And so I think it's actually really important to note that part of what makes this issue so challenging is that from a cat's perspective, it's not purely a matter of being indoors is good and being outdoors is bad, that from a welfare perspective, there is actually some trade-offs that are important to consider for sure. So as has already kind of been touched on, definitely are there risks to outdoor cats. So definitely they can be hit by cars, they can get into fights with other cats, they're at risk of being attacked by predators, they're exposed to diseases and parasites, and of course if they prey on rodents that have also been poisoned by rodenticides, they're at risk of secondary poisoning as well. And depending on where they live in the province, in colder areas, they're also at risk of frostbite in the colder winter months. But then conversely, we also can consider that there are some benefits for outdoor cats. So being outdoors definitely allows them to carry out a lot of natural behaviors. There's so much to smell, to look at, to do, that is a very stimulating environment for them. And part of the freedom of being able to go where they want is choice is really important to them, and it gives them, they can go where they want, when they want. And so those are considered a benefit to them. And you'll see for the welfare of indoor cats that we sort of have the opposite to outdoor cats. So some of the benefits that indoor cats derive are actually the fact that they are protected from those risks that outdoor cats are exposed to. So when they're indoors, of course, they're going to be safe from cars, they're going to be safe from other cats, from predators. Definitely there's reduced exposure to diseases and parasites indoors. If they're indoors year-round, they're protected from the elements. And because they're around their humans, there's actually probably going to be a stronger human-animal bond, simply because they're living around their people all the time, and there's a lot more chance for interaction and for that bond to deepen and for that affection to be there. But we do also have to consider that for indoor cats, there have been some risks, and this is quite well documented, especially in the veterinary literature, that of course, because indoor cats are a lot less active than outdoor cats, they're at risk of obesity, so they're eating a lot, sitting around a lot, which means they gain weight. Depending on the cat's personality as well, they are at risk of being bored. They can be anxious from being cooped up. They can also become frustrated from being cooped up. And this basically has to do with the fulfillment of those natural behaviors, that there may be less opportunities depending on how that cat's being kept indoors. If someone's not putting a lot of effort into that relationship and they're just laying around, that there's an emotional side that can compromise their welfare. And finally, because of this, the emotional impacts, this can also lead to stress-related illnesses to consider as well. So in light of all of this, the BC SPCA looks at those risks and benefits, we've weighed them out, but then we also, of course, have to consider the serious and severe impacts of cats on birds and other wildlife. So therefore, that's why our position is that we recommend that guardians keep their cats contained. And there are three main ways of doing this. Cats can be indoors only. They can be indoors with supervised outdoor access, and they can also be indoors with an outdoor enclosure. And in promoting these sort of three different ways of keeping cats, there are some barriers that we are up against. So first of all, there's definitely this traditional view that's existed for quite a long time, that basically it's natural for cats to be outdoors, that they need to go outside. There's also the difficulty of cats that are already outdoors. If you're considering bringing them indoors, the difficulty of transitioning them when they are used to that much freedom and that much choice and that much stimulation, that when you bring them indoors, you can definitely run the risk of that frustration and boredom. And another important point, I think, is that we sort of don't really think of cats in the same way as we think of dogs. So it's normal for us to take dogs for a walk, perhaps to go to a dog park, that sort of thing. But there's this myth kind of that cats are these low maintenance pets. They don't really need a lot. And so it's about changing people's mind and understanding that if we want to provide good welfare for our cats who are indoors, that definitely we need to put more effort into that relationship. So that's a barrier that we see, that we think that some more education, giving some people some resources to be able to do this is what's needed. And I think the solution is basically to go back to those natural cat behaviors and show people that what cats can do outdoors can actually be replicated indoors or with supervised or, you know, outdoor access or outdoor enclosures. So for indoors only, definitely the behaviors we're looking at are cats want to perch, cats want to hide, they want to scratch, they want to climb, they want to jump. So you can do this simply by, you know, a scratching post, a couple of window ledges in your house, or you can go all out like this person's done, which is completely decorate their wall with some pretty awesome things that these cats love. So climbing to all different levels, perching from up high, hiding in that box there. So definitely you don't have to go all out like this. There's a range of things you can do, but definitely imagination is really your only limit. You can do something pretty cool like this. Then supervised outdoor access, basically for those who are lucky enough to have a yard that's fenced in. Supervised access could be as simply on a nice day going outside with your cat, and you could be on your phone or on your computer as your cat is wandering around the backyard. And the advantage to this is your cat's smelling all of that stuff, checking all of that stuff out, but with you there, your cat is not going to be preying on birds or other wildlife. Another way to do supervised outdoor access is through leash walking, which actually is becoming more and more popular. I've actually seen quite a few cats on leashes outdoors myself. And definitely this depends on the personality of the cat. So that's what's so great about all these different options, is it allows people to choose what works best for their own cat. So leash walking tends to be best for cats that are very confident, very curious, very bold, who like to explore. A cat that's, you know, on the shyer side is probably going to feel pretty intimidated being out on a leash. And of course, it's always important to recognize that the cat's not going to be walking in the same way as a dog. So definitely having a destination in mind, you probably are just going to go at your cat's pace, and you could ultimately just be standing in one spot as your cat kind of wanders around in a circle, sniffing and checking things out. And that's just knowing that, yeah, cats are different pets than dogs, and not to have different expectations of them. Then there are a range of outdoor enclosures, and we're definitely seeing more of these in Vancouver, which is pretty cool. They can range from the pretty simple style here, which is basically just a window box. So it allows the cat to come and go and just sniff and watch the world go by. Then we have a slightly larger window box, which allows then for some ledges inside. There's a scratching post. This one's actually large enough for a person to sit inside with the cat as well if they want to hang out with the cat on a nice day. And this one's on the second floor of this person's house, so it's a little more elaborate. Then there's the ones that you can attach to your porch or your patio, more of a freestanding style. And this one would allow, you know, a person to come and go, to put in chairs and, you know, read a book or do whatever as they sit outside with their cat. And then there's the freestanding one in this backyard, which, as you can see, has ramps and ledges. There's toys in there. You can put cat-safe plants. There's beds. Definitely, these are allowing, as you kind of increase in size and complexity, you're allowing for more natural behaviors for that cat, and just giving them more to do, more variety from their indoor life. And so what the BC SPCA is doing is, as we're trying to shift society to this new way of viewing cats and looking at cat ownership, is we're trying to raise public awareness through all the different channels that we have available to us. So social media, in particular Facebook, is a great way for us to spread the word. We've done a lot of posts about patios that are really, really popular, and basically showing people that it is achievable, that it's you can go simple or you can go elaborate. It can suit your budget. You could hire someone to do it, to build it for you. We also do it through our newsletters, which we have 160,000 subscribers. And actually this year we did a story over the summer on patios, and it had been the second most popular story of the year. So definitely showing that our supporters are wanting this content and wanting to know more. We also have adult and youth magazines, so we spread the word through there. And what's really great about reaching the kid audience is kids are going to be the next generation of cat guardians. So reaching them when they're young and showing them that these things are possible, and ultimately what we would expect of people to be good cat guardians, that's a great way of doing that. Also on our website, so that's where all our resources are. We had a news item that was linked to the newsletter story on Patios, was the 5th most popular news item of the year, which again is pretty good because that's up against our adoption stories and our cruelty cases, which definitely tend to garner a lot of public attention. So the fact that Patios are up there is pretty impressive. And then last year, we weren't able to do it this year, unfortunately, because of the pandemic, but last year we ran a Patio tour in which some of those patios that I showed you earlier were actually built as part of that tour, and the people that agreed to be part of the tour, we actually had a grant to build those patios for them. So for the actual event, we had 170 attendees. And then throughout the year, as we were promoting leading up to this tour in the summer, we had coverage by 9 media outlets, which was pretty awesome. And finally, public awareness through the partnerships. So this whole Cats and Birds subcommittee that we have is another great way for us to raise public awareness, because it's the dual audience of the conservation and wildlife audience, as well as our traditional kind of cat and dog audience as well. So basically, I think my message today is that let's make this the social norm. I really think that we need to stop thinking of free roaming cats as being the way to keep cats, that what we want is people to think of cats indoors with an enriched life that gives them great welfare. And of course, you can go to our website for resources. So if you yourself are a cat guardian, or you know someone who is and has an outdoor cat and you want to encourage them to bring that cat indoors, definitely we have resources that could help them. So patio building guides, leash walking recommendations for people who want to try that, and then definitely just care and behavior tips. So helping to deal with your cats having a difficulty transitioning to the indoor lifestyle, we have some tips there, and some great recommendations for indoor enrichment on basically how to keep your cat interested and stimulated daily by spending some time with them. Thank you so much.
Perfect.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. And Megan, so we'll turn it over to Sierra for, I think we're going to have another poll launched.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much to all the panelists for their great presentations. So as we transition into the moderated panel discussion and FAQ, Anna's going to send out another poll. So if you as viewers can again participate, that would be most appreciated. And once we have your answers, we'll share the results again. Also, just a reminder, if you do have any questions for the panelists, please feel free to use the Q&A and chat functions on the side. We'll record your questions and ask them when we move into the general questions session. So awesome. Just have a chance to answer that poll, and then we'll move into our first discussion question. Awesome. So it looks like, yeah, everyone is kind of agreeing advocacy is pretty important. And I think research and resources are pretty important too. I think we need a mix of all three if we're going to see some success on this issue. Okay, so the first discussion question for the panelists is, cats kill small mammals and mice, which is often seen as a benefit for those with issues of rodent control. What are your thoughts on these type of interactions, and what alternative methods would you suggest individuals use to deal with rodent or small mammal control? And for any of the panelists who'd like to start us off, go ahead.
I'll jump in on this one. Thanks, Sierra. First anyways. So just thinking about the 2013 publications, the one from the US looked at mammals as well as birds by Loss et al. Anyways, they found that of the billions of mammals that were killed annually by cats, most of them were actually native, so not the pest species. And in fact, in suburban and rural areas, I think 75 to 100% of the mammalian prey were actually native mice, shrews, voles, and squirrels and rabbits. So not, the rats that we are having troubles with. Calgary, which has had a long-standing cat bylaw, has had no reports of increased rodent activity when they implemented no roaming for cats. And additionally, on the other side, in Toronto and Vancouver, which have no restrictions on cats roaming, rat populations are booming there. That's based on increased public complaints and calls to pest management services. And then there's a great study that came out of New York looking at whether cats can control rats. And what they found is in over 200 instances of hunting behavior in cats, I think only 20 resulted in rat predation attempts, and like maybe 2 or 3 were actually successful. And what actually happened with the rats is they changed their behavior to avoid cats. So while people thought, oh yeah, we have less rats, it was actually that they were just seeing them less because rats were changing their behavior. So the cost benefit, you know, they're not controlling rats as we might think. And in the meantime, they're taking out a lot of birds. And if you look at best management practices for controlling our pest rodents that we consider pests, house mice, black rats, roof rats, deer mice, the recommendation is not to use cats. The recommendation is to remove the food, the shelter possibilities, and the nesting habitat possibilities for them. So those are my reasons, and I know that Jay and Harold have some other great points too.
Yep, and I'll just jump in as well and just mention there's some on the SPCA website. We do have a great page with associated best management practices for rodent control. So you can go to the website and see those resources, which are super accessible in terms of stating what those practices are and how to move forward on that.
Other comments from the panelists?
I would just echo what Tanya said, that the BC SPCA is all about preferring exclusion and attractant management methods than relying on cats, for sure. That it's much more effective. That's all about human behavior at the end of the day, I think.
Awesome, thanks so much. Okay, so the second question here is, looking forward, what do you hope to see happen with birds and cats in BC? How do you think a more sustainable system can be accomplished, and what sort of advocacy work do you feel is most important to focus on?
Megan, do you want to go first? Do you want me to go first?
You can go.
Okay. I just had a cat jump out of my lap, sorry. I'm not the cat guardian, I'm the cat servant. Research has shown, I mean, a lot of us, you know, on the wildlife side think about, you know, bylaws and licensing. But research has shown that bylaws and licensing alone do not work by themselves. They have to be accompanied by other tools. I don't know how many people are familiar with Calgary model, but the Nature Canada website, catsandbirds.ca, has some great information on this. And they had a very successful approach to cat control, animal control. They've got low rates of euthanasia, they've got a high return to owner rate, and they actually have really high bylaw compliance. And so what they did was they started with collaboration. So they brought everybody to the table, from the cat folks to the veterinarians to animal control, etc., from probably the gardeners too. They spent a lot of time with public education well before they ever got into implementing bylaws. So it was really, really around how cat owners are going to benefit from, and the community will benefit from, their cats being responsible pets, and from them being responsible pet owners. So that was really huge. They had school programs. They also targeted low-income neighborhoods with free spay-neuter. And they really focused on, you know, if we bring in these kinds of programs, we're going to focus on reuniting you with your owners. So they're giving services to people. They trained the animal control folks in conflict resolution, and a big thing was compassion. So they waived fees where there were low-income people. So education was a huge part of it, and they've got one of the highest compliance rates in the country for cats is 50%, which seems maybe not amazing, but it really is an amazing number. So what they've got is they've got mandatory licensing for cats that don't have permanent ID. They've got a no-roam bylaw. All adopted animals from shelters are spayed and neutered. Licensing fees cover enforcement, and they have huge public communication about responsible pet ownership, including things like good pet owners are good renters, and working with landlords that way as well. So that's just from my end. It's kind of the whole package, which is kind of the approach I think we're taking here with Vancouver.
And I would totally agree, Tanya, that it's about having lots of tools in your toolbox, right? Not relying on only one way of addressing the issue. One thing I'll draw attention to is I really think that, like I spoke in my presentation about the partnerships, is really important. So I think it's really important for cat folks and wildlife folks to get together and to realize their common goal of seeing fewer free roaming cats and working together to achieve that. Because instead, I think we're just spending time yelling at each other perhaps from across the divide, and I think we could really accomplish a lot if we agreed on those goals and could work together on programs. And I also want to see, I think ultimately through the education that Tanya mentioned, sort of a societal shift in the way that we view and value cats. So in terms of pets, I think dogs are probably, you know, at the top of that ladder. That you know, back in the day, perhaps it was okay for dogs to free roam, and, you know, with the introduction of bylaws and stuff, that's just not what people do anymore for the most part, right? That we don't open our doors and just let our dogs go into the neighborhood. And I don't think, you know, we should be doing that with cats anymore. And so I would like to see it to become expected that when you take on a cat, that you put effort into that relationship, that you spend time playing with them, that you interact with them. They're not just an animal that kind of exists in your house, that you develop, you know, that deep bond. And I mean, cats are, you know, such fantastic pets. And so it's just changing our mindset that we do need to put a little more effort in. And of course, things like ID and spay neuter are incredibly important as well. So definitely just echo what Tanya said and hoping for that tidal shift, so that if you're letting your cat outside, you're in the minority. And so there's a bit of peer pressure there that, hey, you better bring your cat indoors.
Awesome.
Great,
Thanks,
Megan. I'll just jump in as well. And thanks, Tanya, to the perspective that what we're trying to achieve in Vancouver, especially with this, you know, background research with the urban bird count and the cat count, is to bring that research angle and scientific rigor to our understanding of the situation that we have in Vancouver right now, and then also working with this committee and these partnerships to maximize our collective input. So if we can have agreement on some of the basic principles in terms of moving forward, we're not, I think, Megan, you put it, we're not at cross purposes. We're working together and we have common goals. And I think if we can, or as we work forward, we will get better at what we do. And then the idea is that we can document what we've done and that it can be replicated in other places. So that's what we're trying to achieve here. And I know that we've made incredible progress from when we first started on this project and initiating, because nobody wanted to talk about it at all. And that was almost 6 years ago. And over the 6 years we've made, it's, you know, it's been a long time, but the progress we've made has been significant. So I'll leave it at that. If anybody else wants to jump in.
Yeah, just quickly to sort of build off and sort of echo with the comments that we've already discussed, is that one of the things I learned throughout the cat count was when we were engaging in sort of press or either radio interviews, was that lack of awareness amongst cat owners, and sort of just having that initial step of first and foremost, like making that awareness known. Because a lot of the times interacting with different residents within the city, be them cat owners, or just like the individual press that we're engaging with, it was a lack of knowledge around the impacts that cats have, as well as the risks that cats were like just facing when they were outside. So I think that we really, at least when it comes to like our future education, and once we identify those sort of hotspots within Vancouver, really driving home that that sort of awareness and education around specifically the impacts that cats have, as well as the risks associated with them being outside.
Perfect. Any other final comments from the panelists before we move into the unmoderated questions? Awesome. Well, thanks so much. So we're going to move into the unmoderated part of the panel section, and Anna's going to send out our third and final poll for you to answer. We'd love to know if you enjoyed this panel, if it was beneficial, and what you learned. So at this point, if you have any questions for the panelists, you can either use the chat on the side or the question and answer button near the bottom of your screen. I'll read out the questions for the panelists and give them a chance to respond. So we did have a few questions in the chat earlier, and so I'll read out those that I've received. The first one is for Harold. Is anyone considering native plants and trees to improve insect biomass for birds in the city?
That's a great question. I don't know if you're in Vancouver, but if you walk around Vancouver streets, you'll see that most of our streets are filled with trees made of non-native varieties. There's lots of Norway maples. There are a lot of trees that have not built up these mutual relationships with insects and birds. And so those trees usually don't have the same sort of insect populations that a native tree might have, like a Douglas fir or some other alders and such. And so that's one of the things that I'm going to be looking at in my research, is seeing how, if these birds are clustering around the native species that are strewn across Vancouver, and to see if there is that strong relationship between these, maybe most of the trees on a block are invasive, but there's a couple native ones and all the birds are on those. So I'll be looking at those sorts of patterns and hopefully be able to take those results to the city and try and get the city to start planting more trees that are used by birds, and also spreading that to homeowners and telling them that, okay, these sorts of trees birds really like. If you plant these in your yard, you'll have birds all over and it'll be a really wonderful place.
Wonderful. And the next question was, how do you advise dealing with feral cats?
All right, I'll field that one for sure. So the BC SPCA's approach is TNR, which of course is, for many of you might be familiar with, it's trap, neuter, return. And again, this is just one of the tools in the toolboxes. And so what we advocate is, if there is a cat colony, that there is a dedicated caretaker for that colony who is aiming for 100% spay neuter of those animals, and then also looking out for those cats. So providing food, water, and shelter, as well as, being aware of any health problems and taking care of that as well. And part of TNR means identifying any cats in the colony that are friendly enough to be adopted. If kittens happen to be born, then taking those kittens and adopting them into homes, because you can socialize them from a young age. And there is science to back up the fact that TNR over time will decrease the size of a colony, and colonies have shrunk to zero eventually. And of course, that's paired with education to prevent people from abandoning their cats and adding to those colonies as well. So it's multifaceted.
Awesome. Another question for Harold. Did you notice any changes in bird abundance / behavior with the wildfire smoke we had this year?
Great question. So just as that wildfire smoke was getting really big, it was just a kind of, bird migration was really peaking. And so you had all these birds coming in from Alaska and the Yukon to here the same time that they were getting hit by this wildfire smoke. And I didn't actually notice much differences in behavior. It seemed like birds were, they're coming in from a long way away. They're trying to eat and fill up as quickly as possible. And so they didn't seem to be too affected by the smoke. But perhaps there's bigger long-term effects that the smoke can have on their lungs. And obviously they're flying through this area and exerting a lot of metabolic capacity. So there could be some long-term effects from the smoke in that. But I didn't notice any behavioral effects.
Wonderful. And another question from Pamela. She asked if American robins are a good indicator for this. Their distribution / population is benefited by urbanization, and they easily feed on exotic fruiting species.
Yeah, so American robins were just my example in that study, but I hope to be able to create basically that sort of analysis for all the birds that are in Vancouver, and to be able to see for each bird how the habitats they're using differ between now and in the 60s, and what sort of plants and habitat are they going to be relying on. So the hope is that we can do that same sort of thing for all those species. And American robins are, as you mentioned, they do pretty well in urban environments. So that's why it's kind of even scarier that they're declining and represent something that's really going badly. And so they are kind of a good species to try and understand what we can possibly do better, because they're one that usually does do well in urban environments.
Awesome. A question for Megan. Great discussions. Are SPCAs in other parts of the province promoting these options for adopters of cats?
Definitely. So we have 37 branches around the province, and all the information that we produce comes from our provincial office, and we send it out to our branches for sure to promote. I would say that patios and things like that probably spread more quickly in cities than perhaps in rural areas, that in rural areas we might have more of a challenge, but definitely it's something that we want province-wide for sure.
Awesome. And probably a question for DG. Is there a short blurb with links that we can promote to BC Nature Club's websites and social media?
If by that you mean a short blurb on the projects or the initiatives, we've got, yes, on our website you can go to the Cats and Birds pages. The other thing that we do have is a brochure called The Happy Cat, and it is available in a print form that we can distribute, or we can, if you get in touch, we can mail out copies that can be distributed locally. So hopefully that answers your question in terms of getting involved. And I think the other part is, as we move forward, if there's interest, to get in touch with us, to have the ability to engage in terms of further outreach and sort of maximizing our reach of our engagement, social media, etc. So I guess those are the three aspects in terms of moving forward with with nature clubs and conservation organizations.
Awesome. And our last question here, also for DG, will anyone be leading engagement and community partnerships within the Fraser Delta / BBIBA areas? So Delta, Surrey, and White Rock.
Well, right now our focus is on Vancouver as our sort of hub right now, but we do see this as a greater Vancouver initiative as we move forward. So it's all about partnerships, and I think our idea is that we can replicate this sort of thing in other places. Our second priority area is in the South Okanagan, just because of the number of species at risk, the overlap between species at risk and vulnerable species and urban areas. So, but certainly I would again urge, if you want to get in touch, and we can move it forward, because we know that it is not just an issue here in Vancouver. We do need to work on this in urban areas right across the province. So get in touch.
Wonderful. And we have one more question in the chat here before we move to closing remarks. So what do the other panelists think about feral cats, and what percentage of outside cats are feral versus owned?
That sounds like a good question for Galen.
Yeah, so the amount of, the percentage of feral cats versus owned cats is going to be different given the urban space that you're talking about. And it is still a little too early to say for certain for a city like Vancouver. However, just from the Vancouver cat count alone, it does look like the majority of the cats that we're getting on camera are owned. And so that is like the majority of the focus and why we're focusing so much on responsible pet ownership. That isn't to say that Vancouver doesn't have a feral cat population, because there does seem to be evidence of that as well, but it's still a little too early to tell or sort of make that distinction about percentages. But just to sort of, clarify that there is those two populations present within Vancouver specifically.
I just wanted to add to that, from the Blanchard paper in 2013, it was estimated that 60% of bird mortality feral cats were responsible for. So it is the majority, but it's not that much more than owned cats.
Wonderful, thanks so much. So that's all for our question period today, and I'll hand it off to DG for some closing remarks.
Right, well, thanks very much. So I just, we've just put this other slide up that mentions all the different resources that you can find. There's a link in the chat box, so you can copy that. But certainly want to thank everybody for participating in the panel. I think it was a really great combination of presentations and discussions. So thanks very much to all our panelists. And thanks very much to all the folks who joined us today. We will have a recording of this available on our website. And thanks, and have a really great day, everybody. Bye for now.